This is Chronicle on WCVB Channel 5.
A party turned violent led to a murder on Cape Cod.
The individual lost his life based on foolish pride.
David Milan says he's changed, and his victim's mom is the reason.
As soon as I saw him, I just really felt love for him.
She chose to forgive.
Moments of truth, criminals.
I made the choice to rob, terrify, and murder.
And victims.
You can help their stolen lives matter.
Healing together. 5 investigates Mike Bodette goes inside a Massachusetts prison to report on a groundbreaking program. Restorative justice. Next on Chronicle.
Good evening. Lock them up, but don't throw away the key. It's a new way of thinking in Massachusetts.
Tonight, 5 Investigates takes us behind the wall, where a practice with ancient roots is gaining momentum in our state prisons. Mike Bodette obtained exclusive access to MCI Norfolk to see restorative justice in action.
Inside MCI Norfolk, one convicted killer after another is brought to tears.
Not a day goes by where I'm not saddened by how I acted that night.
I made the choice to rob, terrify, and murder a young store clerk in an attempt to flee a crime.
These are public apologies at the Restorative Justice Responsibility Retreat.
My ignorant, selfish actions stole the life of your son, brother, and uncle.
The Department of Correction allowed 5 investigates into the prison for the retreat if we agreed to conceal the faces of inmates who did not want to be identified. The apologies, one step in a practice called restorative justice, where inmates and family members of murder victims come together to help them understand the full impact of their crimes and take responsibility for their actions. The ultimate goal, rehabilitation for criminals and preventing them from reoffending, in prison or out, if they're eventually released.
Let me say clearly that I am guilty and that I sincerely and genuinely apologize to the innocent. I am truly sorry.
At the receiving end of these apologies, loved ones left behind after murders. But restorative justice is a give and take.
Something hits you so hard, you feel it, but you don't know what hit you.
Janet Connor's 19-year-old son Joel was stabbed to death in his Dorchester apartment in 2001. She told the inmates about what it was like to learn her youngest son was killed.
Shock, confusion, disbelief. My son's been hurt. My son's been stabbed. My son's hurt bad. My son's dead.
Like the public apologies from the inmates, Connor's talk is part of the restorative justice process.
You can't change your past actions, but you can help us bring our loved ones forward. You can help their stolen lives matter. Restorative justice is a way to be in the world. Thank you.
More than 200 people, from inmates to relatives of murder victims, attended the 2-day retreat, which includes numerous smaller dialogue circles throughout the weekend.
These men have chosen to go down the road less traveled and talk about hard things.
Dr. Karen Lashinsky is a sociology professor at Curry College who volunteers her time coordinating the restorative justice group here.
What we see from the incarcerated is that exchange of dialogue creates empathy, that the men begin to understand.
In this program, inmates are not actually in the room with family members of their victims.
Although it's not a direct victim-offender dialogue, they actually see a mother talking about her dead child.
We love you, Ms. Connor. I thank you.
And you have an incarcerated man sitting in the audience starting to think about, well, this isn't my victim, but starting to think about, wow, did my victim had a mother and a father? Right? And so that begins a process.
A process in which inmates can then participate in a multi-week intensive restorative justice program.
It is not touchy-feely. It's probably one of the hardest things that the men will do in this prison in terms of taking a look at the enormity of grief that they've caused. And you're going to have to take responsibility for what you did. That is a very difficult conversation.
Convicted murderer Robert Littles has had that conversation after participating in the intensive restorative justice program. He moved to Boston from Queens and was selling drugs as part of a drug gang.
I walked up behind him actually with a .38 snub nose, and I shot him once in the back of the head.
Littles was 17 years old when he was arrested in 1990 for the murder of Calvin Reese in Roxbury, a rival gang leader who Littles believed had snitched on one of his own gang leaders.
And that's one of the reasons why I actually love restorative justice, is because it actually gave me, it made sense of everything that I went through and what I became. I actually traced back that one incident to a child incident that I had, where I was actually hit in the back of the head with my uncle with a brick for telling on him.
Littles says restorative justice helped him understand the impact of the murder he committed and is now keeping him out of trouble in prison.
It's a philosophy that you have to live by and be governed by.
I never had the chance to think about, after I fired the bullet in my case, you know, what the family went through, what do they have to do now to live with that loss?
The program has also made an impact on convicted killer Thomas Kuntz. The Marine was out on leave when he murdered Mark Santos in New Bedford in 1987 after a night out with friends turned violent.
This is how restorative justice helped me to understand the damage that I've done to the community. Carrying guns at 1 o'clock in the morning in that community, I had no business being there.
Restorative justice has its skeptics, those who worry it's a soft-on-crime approach. But Dr. Lashinsky couldn't disagree more and points to lower recidivism rates inside and outside prison as proof it's working.
It isn't for everyone, but it is another way of doing criminal justice in which we see positive outcomes.
And Mike Bodette joins us now here on Chronicle. And Mike, curious a little bit what it was like being in that room with people on both sides of violent crime. It seemed as if people were willing to open up to you about their experience.
They did open up. It was pretty fascinating to see the dynamic with people on both sides, but it wasn't just the inmates and it wasn't just the families. You also had prosecutors there, state and federal prosecutors. You had victim advocates. So a lot of people who have a stake in all this and want to see what it's all about. I think there's a real curiosity about it.
So do the inmates get a benefit from this, like time off their sentence if they complete this program and do those things?
Some of them do. There's a 34-week intensive program. So the retreat is sort of the introduction, but if they go on and do this 34-week intensive program, they can get about 3 months off their sentence if they're actually eligible for parole.
Okay. Mike will be back with us later in the program.
In fact, next, a murder on Cape Cod.
I thought about the experience many times over. It didn't have to happen.
Then he reached out to his victim's mother.
She's just my motivator. She's my motivator for change.
Restorative justice programs in Massachusetts bring convicted criminals and loved ones of those left behind together, but they're never connected by the same crime.
But Mike Bodette did find the story of an unexpected bond between a convicted killer and his victim's mother.
This one night in 2002 changed David Milan's life forever. A night of partying on the Cape with friends. Milan was 18 years old. The night took an ugly turn after some people showed up at the party and there was a fight. Milan and his friends wanted revenge. They headed to an apartment in South Yarmouth, Milan armed with a 7-iron. When it was over, 21-year-old Spencer McLeod was dead. McLeod was not at the party earlier in the night, but was stabbed repeatedly while trying to help his friend who was being attacked. 6 young men, including Milan, were arrested. Milan was charged with murder, home invasion, and armed burglary.
The individual lost his life based on foolish pride.
This is David Milan today, 33 years old, serving a life sentence at MCI Norfolk for second-degree murder with a chance at parole after 20 years.
I thought about the experience many times over. It didn't have to happen. It really didn't.
It is the most horrific thing to ever go through.
Robin Farnsworth was an emergency room nurse working at Cape Cod Hospital when the call about a stabbing came in.
I remember when they wheeled him in the room, just being struck by how pale the body was.
But then Farnsworth learned the name of the victim, Spencer McLeod.
I didn't know it was my son until they pulled his wallet out of his pants to notify family when I saw his name.
It was brought to me that they were...
David Milan is now a restorative justice veteran at MCI Norfolk after attending his first retreat 5 years ago and listening to Janet Connors, the mother of murder victim Joel Turner.
Our lives are permanently altered.
Milan thought about the mother of the man he and his friends murdered.
Mrs. Farnsworth, I'd like to start out by saying that I'm sorry it has taken me so long to write to you.
Farnsworth wrote back, and it was the beginning of an unusual friendship.
I get emotional when I think about it, but when I read the words off the paper, it wasn't her forgiving me because she chose to forgive. And it wasn't her forgiving me for just being there, being a part of it. It was her forgiving me for taking her son's life.
They exchanged letters and phone calls, and there have even been prison visits.
I can remember just walking out and I went to shake her hand, but she embraced me with a hug instead, and I just started crying.
As soon as I saw him, I just really felt, love for him.
Farnsworth says her faith has helped her forgive and heal.
You're not saying, oh, it's okay, you know, that you murdered my son. It's not. That's why he's in prison, you know, that's that part of it. But you're releasing them from any debt to you.
And while Milan is a believer in restorative justice practices, Farnsworth has some reservations.
Should it ever replace the consequence? No. There has to be consequence for criminal activity.
The consequence all too real for David Milan. A life sentence, he says, is made easier because of Farnsworth.
She's sincere in her forgiveness, and she's just my motivator. She's my motivator for change.
I can't believe that kind of forgiveness and faith. David Milan believes he will be granted parole someday.
And Robin says she supports his release down the road at some point and believes that they'll have a friendship that will continue while he's still in prison and when he's out of prison.
That's incredible. Well, next, a police chief's take on restorative justice.
My immediate reaction was, it's soft on crime.
Does he still believe that?
So we've seen how restorative justice works inside prison, but it's also a practice used by police departments across one Massachusetts county.
Mike Bodette shows us how people accused of breaking the law are being held accountable without getting a criminal record.
Every penny counts at the West Concord 5 and 10.
What are you gonna buy?
I don't know.
So it's no surprise that owner Maynard Forbes doesn't appreciate people stealing from his small business.
And I said, you know, you've just taken this $10 bill out of my pocket. You don't realize that, but that's what you've done.
Forbes' scolding of the shoplifter unfolded through a program called Communities for Restorative Justice, C4RJ, which brings victims and offenders face to face. It started out as a community police partnership in Concord in 2000 and has now grown throughout Middlesex County with 17 police departments and the district attorney's office on board. Erin Freeborn is C4RJ's executive director.
We've done everything from assault and battery, we've done breaking and entering.
Police departments, the DA's office, or the courts refer cases to the program, most involving crimes committed by juveniles.
Jake, could you please tell us what happened the night of the break-in?
The suspect, victims, supporters, police, and a facilitator from C4RJ come together in a circle like this one. Freeborn says it's a way to hold someone accountable without giving them a permanent mark on their record.
For the victims, we're really asking them how the crime affected their life.
I feel just sick when I think of him being in my kid's room.
And for the offender, we're talking to them to see where they are with accepting responsibility and actually starting to think about the ripple effects of their actions.
The opening circle ends with a contract for the next few months, which can include apology letters and community service. It sounds very touchy-feely.
The reality is that it is harder to sit across from the person that you hurt and actually accept responsibility.
I was presented with this concept, and my immediate reaction was, It's soft on crime.
But Arlington Police Chief Fred Ryan is no longer a skeptic.
I sat through a restorative justice circle and actually witnessed firsthand the process unfold.
Ryan says before this restorative justice alternative, officers had few options.
Arrest and prosecute and give a young offender the scarlet letter of a Corey record for the rest of their lives, or broom the case and send them home short of any official action, which actually reinforces risky behavior.
When the Black Lives Matter sign outside this Arlington church was slashed last year, detectives figured out who was responsible. Instead of charging the 23-year-old man, the case was referred to Communities for Restorative Justice. Chief Ryan was there for the opening circle and witnessed a parishioner angrily telling the offender about the impact of the crime.
To hear the offender speak about his lack of knowledge of the impact that his acts had on families. I mean, he had no idea. And therein, I think, lies the power and value of restorative justice.
How are we doing, guys?
Maynard Forbes understands the power and the value. Over the years, he's encountered a number of accused criminals through the restorative justice program, including a young man who spray-painted graffiti on the back of his building. Forbes ended up hiring him to work in his store.
Do you think that particular person got the message, understood the impact?
Oh, I think he did, yes. I think he did.
A study of C4RJ cases showed people who participated in the program are less likely to commit another crime than those who go through the traditional court system.
And I truly believe that that's because they've had to sit across from the person that they hurt, and there's a face there and a story there.
You've helped a young person develop in life. Don't push him down. Push him forward. Push him up.
And more than 700 cases have been diverted to this program since it began.
Right. Important to note, though, that if the victim prefers that charges be pressed, then the case will move forward through the traditional court system.
Well, next, the conflicting emotions of a grieving parent. Channeling anger into action. That's what the parents of a 13-year-old boy who was gunned down in their own Boston neighborhood are doing.
Mike Bodette says they hope restorative justice efforts will continue to catch on in Massachusetts.
At the True Vine Church in Dorchester, pastors Ron and Kim Odom aren't just singing the words. They're trying to live by them every day, despite their enormous loss.
Many of you know that our family was certainly impacted tragically by violence in the community.
Their 13-year-old son, Stephen, was shot and killed in 2007 while walking home with a friend after the killer mistakenly thought the friend was a rival gang member.
He was shot and killed, and so we certainly understand that these things are happening in our community, but it doesn't mean that there's no good in our community.
Despite their strength, the Odoms still struggle.
There are plenty of times that I just get so, there's thoughts of retaliation. There's thoughts of anger.
But the Odoms focus on their work, which takes them from their Dorchester church to MCI Norfolk for another restorative justice responsibility retreat.
My life matters. All lives matter.
Every year, the Odoms are apprehensive about going into the circle, face to face with convicted murderers, even though they never see the person who killed their son. They say the inmates also have reservations, encountering parents who lost their child to violence.
And I said to him, but you know what? I'm so glad that you decided to be here. I'm glad that I decided to be here. I said, because this is an example of what it's going to take to break this cycle and for us to heal.
It's a message that resonates with State Senator Jamie Eldridge, who also attended the retreat.
Is the work that you're doing day by day and at this retreat having impact on public policy?
Eldridge says yes, and is pushing for restorative justice programs to expand into other prisons. He's repeatedly filed a bill to put a restorative justice law on the books, so other counties will emulate what Communities for Restorative Justice is already doing in Middlesex County, diverting cases away from the courts with the hope that understanding the impact of the crime will prevent people from reoffending.
Lock them up and throw away the key not only is far too expensive, but it's not creating the results of making our community safer.
Mike Beaudet joins us again. So, Mike, where does the restorative justice bill stand right now?
Well, it's been filed for the last 3 sessions. We're in informal session now. In the Senate, it's in the Senate Ways and Means Committee, so it could still pass an informal session. But if it doesn't, Senator Eldred says he'll be refiling again in January, possibly as part of a comprehensive criminal justice reform package.
And what would it do exactly?
It's enabling legislation. So essentially, it would take that program that we saw in Middlesex County and tell district attorneys all over the state, hey, you can do this, but it's not going to cost the state anything. What they're hoping is that these nonprofits, like the one in Middlesex County, pop up in the different counties and get some private funding and actually spread this throughout the state. But it comes down to education. Once people hear about it, how it works, the real impact it has, then they get on board. And it's educating some of those DAs who may not be comfortable with it.
Soft on crime.
Exactly.
Right.
And see the results of it.
Exactly.
Mike, great job. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
thank you.
Important topic, well covered. Nicely done. And that is Chronicle for tonight. Thanks very much for joining us. I'm Anthony Everett.
I'm JC Monahan. Have a great night. We're back here tomorrow, 7:30. Hope you'll join us.